Nurses of Reddit. What were the most haunting things someone said on their deathbed? Former CNA in the dementia unit of an assisted living facility. My dad is on his way to pick me up now. She said that every time I checked on her, until she died about a week after it started, while she was still mobile she would tidy her room and sit on the edge of her bed and just wait most of the day. I started my nursing career out on a palliative unit. In my first 3 months as a RN, I pronounced over 7 deaths. This one patient had advanced dementia and often believed he was at work while he was awake in the hospital. He would often give us, the nurses and care aides, tasks and jobs to do, as he believed himself to be our superior. One day near the end of December he asks me when is New Year's. What day is it this year? I tell him New Year's will be the upcoming Tuesday. He nods and tells me that he thinks he's going to have to quit after the new year. This job is getting too difficult for him and he can't keep up. It's time to retire. I tell him we appreciate all the hard work he's done and we'll miss him terrible when he's gone. That he was a great employee and we all loved working with him. That Tuesday, January 1st, he passed away peacefully in sleep at 0200. I will never forget that conversation. My mom had a lot of strokes. The last one permanently took her ability to speak. I remember getting then call that she was in the hospital again. I went to the and the doctors told me she was septic and had a heart attack. Her chances were low for survival, and if she did make it, she wouldn't be the same. I had to choose to make her comfortable and die, or 48 doctors to try to save her life and have her just existing, which is what she did at the hospice. I loved her and wanted her comfortable. I stayed with her till she died. She couldn't talk, so she held my hand. I put my forehead to hers and told her that I loved her. I also played the Bee Gees music on the phone, one of her favorites, to answer the question. Nothing. I didn't hear her say anything, and I wished it could have been anything that she could have said. It's been 7 years ago, and I still wish for that. Sorry, this sorta doesn't answer the question, but I wanted to tell someone. I didn't mean to. We were sending this middle-aged guy home after his visit. As soon as we moved him off the bed, he went unresponsive and had no heartbeat. We did a couple rounds of CPR, and he began to come to. He blinked a couple times and the doctor running the code jokingly said, "Sir, you almost died on us." The man said, "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to," in a sad way. His heart then stopped again, and we couldn't get him back. Many moons ago, when I was a nursing student, a man in his 40s was lying on his deathbed from terminal cancer, his sobbing wife lying in bed next to him. He looked at his wife, using the last bit of energy he had to gently wipe away her tears and stroke her cheek. He took off his oxygen mask and said, "Don't worry, love. Don't be afraid. It's just death," and passed shortly after. From when I worked in private practice, had a patient get diagnosed with a moderately aggressive, but treatable, throat cancer. We tried everything we could think of to get him to consider treatment. He refused any type of treatment. So after about 3 months, his wife had their 2 adult sons basically carry him into the office at 4:50 p.m. on a Friday afternoon. I was the only nurse in the building. I got him into an exam room. Dude was completely grey, gaunt, and you could hear how close the end was every time he breathed. It wasn't exactly a death rattle, but you just knew his lungs were full of fluid. His sons sit him in a chair, and he starts to slide out. The room was too small to put him on the floor and the exam table was too high to lift him up on it. I stood between his legs and held him upright in the chair while I told the sons to go get the doctor. Told the wife to call 911. We all knew nothing was going to keep the man alive much longer. He patted the side of my leg, it was the most he could move, and whispered, "I should have listened to you all. I don't want to die." He lost consciousness and all I could do was just keep him from sliding out of the chair until the EMTs got there. After the ambulance got him to the hospital, he lasted about 4 hours. Short story. But we had a young patient years ago. She had a history of forced drug use. Had gotten sober a few months ago, but had developed endocarditis, infection of her heart, and had vegetation on her valves as well as severe heart failure from dirty needles. She needed months of antibiotics. And then would be eligible to get a VAD, ventricular assist device, machine to bypass her heart and possibly bridge her to a transplant. After being sober long enough, she had already been on the unit over a month. She was quiet, sweet, and reserved but always thankful for her care. She had no social support. Her mother was who gave her drugs the first time. And she had no contact with anyone in her life except for one friend who came in once a week to check on her. On her 24th birthday we got her a cupcake and sang her happy birthday. We hung a banner in her room. Got her little presents, some games to play in the hospital and adult coloring books. She said thank you, but didn't show a lot of emotion. She was always quiet, and we were not entirely sure how she felt at the time. That day, on her birthday, she went into cardiac arrest and died. We spent 45 minutes trying to get her back. Her friend came in to collect her things and showed us the message she sent her that day. It had a picture of the cupcake, presents, and banner and said I love my nurses. I don't know how to tell them, but they're the best family I've ever had. She did tell us in the end. I'll never forget her. I cried on and off the entire rest of my night shift. This was during my final year as a medical student. Internship. It was late, and we were doing our last rounds for the night. Right before the shift change, there was an elderly gentleman, came from at-home hospice, stage 4 cancer. Covered had limited family visits to short increments. Family often had to wait in the lobbies or go back home until another visiting time slot was opened. He held on for a few days. When we were alone, we had spoken during moments of his lucidity. He had expressed his guilt over the pain his dying was causing to his loved ones. He looked at me with a weak but genuine smile every time I asked if he was okay. He never once complained of pain. He even outright denied pain medication when offered. His reasoning was that someone else would need it and not him. We all knew he was hurting. But, on that last night, he said to me, I want this to be my final lesson to my family. I want to show them how to die with dignity. A few moments later, he asked me if I could say to him it was okay to die, to find peace and rest. He said he couldn't bear the thought of his family seeing him die. He wanted to hold on because he was his family's whole support system. But he finally said his pain was too much. He was ready to pass. I told him that he didn't need to keep fighting for his family's comfort. If he was truly in pain and ready to go, it would be okay to die. His family would understand. Once I gave him the okay, he started the process. Delirium, heavy breathing, and fidgeting, and the death rattle. And then he was gone. He was much a great man, a kind and gentle soul. I never knew for long, but I genuinely miss the man. Rest in peace, sir. When I was 16 I worked as a dietary aide in a pretty nice nursing home. There was this one older gentleman that I became pretty good friends with. He always talked about WW2 and how he had lost so many guys in his company. Several days in a row I had noticed that he wasn't coming down to the dining room for lunch or dinner. Went to his room to check on him and he wasn't there. The nurse said he had a spell and fell out of his bed. His doctor wanted him to go to the hospital for observation. What had really happened is he had a stroke. He got back to the nursing home about a week later and he really couldn't remember anyone except for me. We talked the day after he got back and he told me he wasn't doing good. He knew his time was coming to a close. Said it was time for him to pay for all the horrible things he had done when he was over in Europe. He wasn't a religious man, but he asked me where I thought he was going. I said to bed, because it's getting close to lights out. He said no Joe, BTW. My name is Mike, I mean up or down. Now I'm not a deeply religious person either. But I said, Martin that's not for me to say. He laughed and said I know where I'm going. There's only one place for people who have done what I've done. I've killed so many people Joe. Most of the time it didn't matter who it was. We went into buildings just shooting. There's only one place for me. It's what I deserve. I had absolutely nothing to respond with. When I say that experience shook me to the core, I really mean it. That man's face is burned into memory because of that conversation. He passed away the next day. His son said he kept asking where Joe was at. I quit that day. Working in a nursing home is a haunting place. Takes a special type of person to be able to watch people just die around you. Regrets. It's hard to hear someone referring what they hadn't done in life and wished to do, but don't have the opportunity now. Looked after a guy with end-stage heart failure. He kept having episodes where, if he coughed or leaned forward, anything to increase his intrathoracic pressure, he would pass out. He would come back after a few minutes and gradually go from purple back to pink. How long was I out for that time? He was fully mentally fine, sharp, witty and at peace with what was going to eventually happen to him. Him and me were joking that one of these episodes were going to kill him. As he sipped his tea and we talked rubbish. 5 minutes later it happened again, and he didn't come back. He had a DNR order which was sensible. Very eerie to talk to somebody so vibrant and alert minutes before he died. Such a nice dude. I want to be in that mindset when I go to. She looked at me and said, "You really are a little pipsqueak." I was her favorite nurse too. I'm a nursing student in Canada. And on my palliative rotation I had a patient that was getting medically assisted dying the next day. He was an elderly cancer patient. He told me he was a self-ordained minister. Nothing official, but an at-home type preacher, and that I could confess to him anything I wanted. I humored him and whispered to him some of my biggest secrets. I figured who cares, he was going to die tomorrow anyway. He told me it was alright. And I could tell he appreciated that I confided in him. He also told me his email address and said that, while he would not be sending emails in return, he would be receiving them. He was a cool guy. My great uncle's last words before he passed were, "It is what it is." I know it's really common, but I find myself saying it quite a lot nowadays. It is what it is. My great aunt who lived to be 101 was straight vegetative for like a month or so before passing. The day after her 101st birthday, on the day of her birthday, she suddenly was conscious and awake as everybody had come to leave a birthday cake. She told stories and laughed. Then she went back to being comatose and died the next day. Woman loved her birthday lol. My grandmother grasped the nurse's hand and said, "I think I'm going to die now." The nurse was telling her no, she was doing much better and would likely leave soon, but my grandmother was gone before she could finish her sentence. She knew. I'm not a nurse, but I do know my father's, possibly, last words. I wasn't there, but he called me and left me a long voicemail. It was the middle of the night, so I was passed out. It all boiled down to him apologizing for a fight we had months before, after which we didn't talk for a while. The final words I have recorded before he hung up were, and I quote, "I hope you don't blame yourself for what is going to happen, but I think this is the end for me. I'm sorry I couldn't talk to you one last time." He committed suicide within an hour of that voicemail according to the coroner's report. I was only 17 at the time. When I woke up the next morning, it was too late to call him back. It may not be haunting to most, but it does haunt me to this day, and I still blame myself, because I could tell from his voice that that fight was still weighing on him. My stepfather passed away last year. Towards the end he was very cranky and hadn't treated my mother very kindly. Before he lost consciousness he was stroking her face saying back, quote, "Beautiful, beautiful, that made me happy." Not a nurse, but I'm a surgeon who does critical care, ICU, by training. Most recent haunting / holy shit thing that was said was an 87Y very German guy with acute mesenteric ischemia, essentially a heart attack, but in the gut. His bowels were dead, and he was basically dead man walking for the next 4 hours. When I told him that, I asked if he wanted me to call his wife. COVID restrictions prevented her from being there in person. He just sighed and said, 65 years wasted. I hate that bitch. Don't call her. Get me a beer, a German one. It's almost too dramatic to be real, but I swear to you those were his words. I honestly tried to get the man a beer, but I figured Dilaudid would suffice to ease his transition. I had a non-verbal patient overnight that was in for something pretty routine. Around 6:30 at the end of my shift I walked by his room and smiled at him. He waved to me. 1 minute later he coded and wasn't able to be revived. I'm going to die. I know I'm going to die. He was going for very routine, fairly minor surgery. I held his hand and told him he would be fine. He died shortly after the procedure.